Hi, and welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet, a weekly program providing you with the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne. Coming up, October 3rd to the 9th marks the start of Mental Illness Awareness Week. Joining me to discuss the importance of mental health in teens and how to support those with a diagnosis is Chief of Child and Adolescent Psychology at Montefiore Medical Center. Then, issues of drug use remain a problem for many New Yorkers. The New York City Office of Nightlife is addressing this issue with Intro 56, the Narcan Behind Every Bar campaign. Here to tell us more about the campaign and how it could save more New Yorkers is Executive Director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance. After that, with a mission to support organizations that provide nutritious food to children and families in need, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is offering nearly $2 billion in additional funding to food banks and school meal programs. Joining me to discuss what this means for thousands of families across the country is Vice President of the New York School Nutrition Association. And finally, as conversations around an unjust criminal justice system garners more attention, more people have called for the closure of the heavily criticized Rikers Island Correction Facility. This has been an ongoing fight for many in our city since 2015. Joining me to discuss her efforts to close Rikers Island is Vice President of Policy and Strategy at Exodus Transitional Community. So please stick around. Open BxRx Tuesday starts now. Welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. October 3rd to the 9th marks the start of Mental Illness Awareness Week. Joining me to discuss the importance of mental health in teens and how to support those with a diagnosis is Chief of Child and Adolescent Psychology at Montefiore Medical Center, Dr. Sandra Pimentel. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is a topic near and dear to my heart.
Now, I want to just start talking about the importance of just recognizing mental health or mental illness. Can you just explain, why it's so important that we really recognize, these conditions?
Absolutely. We know that mental health is part of our overall health. And so it's important to recognize mental health because we know that healthy folks do better, they function better. Kids can go to school and learn, adults can go to work and function. And so we know that mental health, as in physical health conditions, really affect our day-to-day lives. And so it's important to be aware when there is mental illness and to be aware of when to get help if there are concerns.
Now, what is important for people in the Bronx to know specifically about mental health?
I think the Bronx is such a vibrant and resilient community. These are and have been clearly really stressful times, even before COVID, obviously, but through COVID and everything that we're experiencing now. And so it's important for the Bronx folks to realize that mental health, as we were just saying, is as important as physical health. And so just as I would tell, my neighbors to keep up with their physical health and go to their primary care physician or get their dental checkups, I would say to pay attention to their mental health and to check in with how they're doing or how their kids are doing. How is stress affecting them? Are they taking care of themselves to take care of the stress levels, to keep that down as well? And so I would encourage my Bronx neighbors to keep an eye on their mental health, to keep an eye on their kids' mental health in the same way that they would any other aspect of health.
Now, what are some ways your organization prioritizes mental health in teens or also in children?
Oh gosh, yeah, I'm at Montefiore and Montefiore Medical Center. I'm in the Department of Psychiatry, and I'm very, very lucky that part of our mission, part of the mission of the institution, really is we are embedded in this community and really prioritizing the health of this community. And again, part of that includes health overall, excuse me, and mental health especially. And so in the Child Outpatient Psychiatry Division, which is where I am, we have several programs looking at and taking care of the clinical needs of our kids and teens here, including we have an anxiety and mood program that's targeted specifically to address anxiety, mood issues, depression, trauma, a lot of those issues. We have an arts and integrated medicine program that really looks at ways of incorporating arts. We have a garden. We have creative ways to incorporate arts and music into helping some kids for whom the traditional therapies may not work. We have something called the REACH program, which is racial, ethnic, and cultural healing. We know that we've been dealing with, our nation and our community has been dealing with, significant stress related to racism, discrimination, and those issues. And really, it was born out of the summer of 2020. This program to help teens and youth deal and talk about the impacts of race and discrimination on their mental health specifically, but health overall. So that's our REACH program. So we're really able to help teens from that aspect as well. We have a lot of teenagers who struggle with significant and severe distress, sometimes resulting in self-harm and self-harming behaviors, or even suicide and suicide attempts. And we have a program, it's called the Adolescent Dialectical Behavior Therapy Program. And that program is really designed to help our most complex teens who are struggling. And it really is an evidence-based program that helps kids navigate significant episodes of distress, emotion dysregulation, urges to suicide, and things like that. So that's a very important program. We have a program that helps kids with eating disorders. So we have a partnership, our department and the Department of Pediatrics. It's one of the only programs of its kind actually serving Medicaid population. And it's an evidence-based intervention that helps kids with anorexia, bulimia, and some of the other eating disorders that you may have heard of. And what we saw during COVID in particular, we saw soaring rates of eating disorders presenting to our emergency rooms, and not just us, but this was a national trend that we saw. So we already had this program off the ground, off and running. And so we have that
I
program
want
to
to
help.
talk a little bit about, because you mentioned COVID, and I wanted to ask, in what ways did the pandemic actually affect the mental health of teens and kids? So I'm really interested to learn a little bit more about that now that you brought that up.
Oh God, yes, gosh, yes. So we saw trends of anxiety and depression increasing already before COVID. We saw rates of suicide in certain groups of kids rising, unfortunately, and COVID really sort of blew it all out of the water, quite frankly. And although we don't really know the long-term effects of COVID, we know that COVID itself. Look, even in the Bronx, we know that Bronx was the epicenter of the epicenter, and COVID itself affected Black, Indigenous, and people of color at higher rates than other populations, and certainly here in the Bronx. We saw kids lose primary caregivers or parents to COVID. We saw, in terms of the effects of the early research that we saw in terms of anxiety, stress, distress, we saw that kids from economically disadvantaged backgrounds were more likely to be impacted, not surprisingly. There was a lot more food insecurity, so that, of course, was impacting health and mental health. We saw the social isolation of the lockdown impacting kids and their mental health early on. Again, we don't fully know the long-term effects, but what we do know is that the research continues to be a bit alarming, actually. And we're seeing that if you look even globally, there's a huge study that looked at, across the world, what are the rates of anxiety and depression in kids? And we're seeing numbers as high as double. So we're seeing rates of anxiety and depression as high as doubled in kids and teenagers. And we're seeing it for marginalized groups in particular. And the rates are higher for older adolescents and girls as well. And so those are groups that we're especially concerned about. We're also seeing, you may have heard, the Surgeon General of the United States ring the bell on youth mental health and the alarm on how significant some of the impacts coming out of, this version of the pandemic on anxiety and depression and that early isolation as well. The other thing that I want to make sure we talk about for all the parents out there, this has been such a stressful time. And what the research tells us that parents of younger kids in particular are extremely stressed and were especially affected during the pandemic. There's some research showing that mothers in particular took a harder hit in terms of their mental health. And, there was increased stress, anxiety, depression in parents as well, understandably, with all that they were contending with, in the earlier parts of the pandemic. And now there was increased substance use for many, increased, or lack of exercise, or increased sedentary lifestyle for a while, which impacted weight and weight gain. And so all these parts of health sort of intermingling. And what we know is that, kid work is de facto family work. So when a parent is affected, we know that kids are affected. And so the whole household stress level was significantly affected by COVID, and still. And again, look, many folks are resilient and they will come out of this. And we have to take care of our most vulnerable.
Now, I really want to know that I heard that a lot of the times, for children, a lot of these mental health conditions can go untreated or unrecognized. Can you explain why that could be happening?
It's a great question. I think, a complex question with probably complex answers. I think in part it's because we don't recognize sort of the potential impacts of mental health in the same way as we might physical health. Maybe there's not enough information on sort of some of the psychological developmental milestones in the same way that there are the physical milestones of when, a child should sit up or crawl and walk, in the same way of hitting developmental milestones of a psychological nature, in that regard. Really about the issue of screening, and are we, do we have pediatricians and primary care folks asking questions about mental health, anxiety. There are recommendations for more and more of that to happen. And we know, look, primary care doctors, teachers, they are tasked with a lot of things already. And, really trying to make asking about mental health as natural as asking about other elements of pain or physical experience. So that may be an issue. We know that, marginalized youth and families from, underserved and disadvantaged backgrounds are less likely to get care. So we need to be more direct in getting care to the people that need it. So there are multiple reasons. There's stigma. Some folks don't want to talk about mental health in the same way, or they feel they can't talk about mental health in the same way as they can about more physical health. And so still, although I think it's getting better, language that destigmatizes mental health, the more people that talk about feeling anxious, depressed, seeking help, seeking support, the better it will be. And, we know even before COVID, there were issues of access, getting specialized help for kids and teenagers from psychologists, social workers who are trained in evidence-based psychotherapies, who are trained in working with the needs of kids specifically, which is a specialty population. We don't have enough specially trained folks to do it. We also don't have enough initiatives in the community. Not everyone needs to come to therapy or needs to do a full set of interventions. How can we get help to people out in the community where they are, or how to get them the resources to address some of the issues of mental health? So answering some of that, I don't know if I fully answered your question, but there are a lot of parts, I think, to the problem.
All right, doctor, thank you so much for joining me.
Sure, my pleasure.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. Issues of drug use remain a problem for many New Yorkers. The New York City Office of Nightlife is addressing this issue with Intro 56, the Narcan Behind Every Bar campaign. Here to tell us more about the campaign and how it could save more New Yorkers is Executive Director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance, Andrew Rigie. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Now, as we know, or many of us know, the presence of drug use, specifically fentanyl, in New York City has affected, our home tremendously. Can you just give us a little bit of background on that?
Sure. Well, drug addiction, overdose, it is a crisis. And unfortunately, in addition to some of these very dangerous addictive drugs, they're being cut with fentanyl, which increases the chance of overdose and death. And, this is a significant issue, not just here in New York City, but really around the country. And the city's nightlife industry, feels a responsibility to try to be supportive because we recognize we are our city's social spaces. And if we can play a role in trying to, save a life, we want to step up and we want to do that.
Now, can you tell me a little bit more about Intro 56?
Sure. So originally, this program started through the city's Office of Nightlife, which was a Narcan Behind Every Bar campaign, which would go out and give Narcan, what is a opioid reversal medicine that could reverse an overdose and save a life to bars. They would offer training, and it was a really great policy. But a big, kudos to Council Member Osei and Council Member Powers, who have now sought with Intro 54 to codify this policy, this program from the Office of Nightlife into city law, to establish it, to make sure that it will remain here for many, many years, and add more support, more training to businesses. So what a bar will be able to do when this law is hopefully very soon signed into law is they would be able to request Narcan, this medicine. They could then receive training for their employees to administer the life-saving medication should someone be having an overdose, not because they necessarily even did drugs inside the premise, but possibly before, and then they enter the premise. Think about how restaurants have CPR kits, in case of an emergency to help save a life. We view this as an extension of that.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more just about the campaign, and it's starting. Can you tell us a little bit more about, your organization and how you guys knew, or that detail that moment when you guys knew this was something that you definitely wanted to be a part of?
Yeah, so the New York City Hospitality Alliance, we represent the city's restaurant and nightlife industries. So we advocate for them in the halls of government about different policies to help these small businesses succeed, to help remove barriers to entrepreneurship, cut the red tape, cut the bureaucracy that so many of our small businesses deal with. And it gives us the opportunity to be really uniquely situated to work within the halls of government, but also work within the nightlife and the restaurant industry and learn about what they need. And something that's really been happening over the years, and I think over the past couple of years, the level of consciousness has raised about how can we play as a nightlife industry a more proactive role in supporting not only our employees and our customers, but really society as a whole when it comes to issues that plague our society. Our local restaurants and bars are always, supporting the local softball team. They're doing fundraisers, they're donating food to help feed hungry New Yorkers, and recognizing that drug addiction and overdose is a crisis. We wanted to see how we could play a role in supporting folks and saving lives, particularly in the nightlife scene where we know people come in and they may not be addicts or addicted to a drug, but they may be just going out one night and experimenting and doing something. And especially if something's cut with fentanyl or one of these other drugs, trying to reverse an overdose is very, very important to us.
Well, I'm really glad that you mentioned that because I wanted to know. At first, I thought it was a little, I was surprised by the fact that, the city wanted to launch this campaign in restaurants or bars instead of health facilities or even community centers. I initially thought that maybe, nightlife, maybe there was some sort of connection. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the locations, whether they're health centers or other community centers, should be providing these types of, life-saving medications and be providing information and education and training. No different from CPR kits or EpiPens when people have a allergic reaction. So I think this is an extension of it. Obviously, we're talking about narcotics here, so that can often take on a greater, conversation about what's right, what's wrong. Our feeling is, we're not in the business of getting into why people are doing specific drugs, what the outcome is. We just know that this is an issue that plagues our society. Our bars, our nightclubs, our restaurants are our social spaces. And sometimes people do take drugs at or when they're going to a venue. And if we should save a life, that should be the most important thing. We can deal with all those other societal issues separately, but we feel that there's a responsibility there. So, we hope that other types of venues and government continues to address this in various ways. But if we can play one, I don't want to say small, but very important role in saving even one life, in our opinion, it's worth it.
Now, I'm curious to know how will the campaign also help those who work in bars? I'm curious to know, the people who work in these establishments, are they having to face people who come in and maybe they're under the influence or anything like that?
Yeah, we heard from workers in the nightlife community that this was something that was really important to them. Some people have lost friends, they've lost family to overdose, and it's something very meaningful. This is a voluntary program. This is not something that is mandated. We also understand, it's very scary to witness someone who may be, overdosing, and it could be intimidating trying to administer the life-saving medication as well. So it's a certainly sensitive subject. It needs to be dealt with delicately, but we can't shy away from dealing with the real issues that our society is facing. And that's why, as part of this legislation, in the introduction, as well as what the Office of Nightlife has been doing, it provides the training and education to nightlife workers. So if they are ever put in a situation where they need to make a decision, at least they are prepared, at least they are trained to do everything they possibly can to try to save a life. And, many folks want to step up if they're ever faced with that position. Hopefully they never would be, of course.
Now, I believe you mentioned that it's not mandatory, right? Can you just explain how do we actually get this in the restaurants and in the bars if it's not mandatory?
Absolutely. So currently you can reach out to the city's Office of Nightlife and learn more about the program. This legislation will create a new vehicle where there'll be additional promotion. The city's Office of Nightlife will work with the city's health department, and businesses, if you're a bar owner or a nightclub or restaurant owner, can contact the city. They can learn more about the program. They can learn more about the life-saving medication. They can learn more about the training. And then they can submit a request and they get a response from someone in the city who is a technical expert on these issues. They can answer any questions they have. They can explain what the process looks like. And then they can actually go and they can train their employees so they're prepared to administer the medication, and they will deliver, the medication so it is on premise at the venue. So just like someone may have a CPR kit, a business right now, they would have this, medication there as well if the need to administer it occurred.
Now, can you just explain? I know there's a lot of stigma around anything related to drugs, really. Can you just explain, maybe for someone who's worried or concerned, will this at all change their dining experience or, their experience with a bar?
No, no, no. I would put it like this. This is not coming in and telling people to do drugs or anything. It's like someone was eating in a restaurant right now and they started choking, or something happened where they needed to utilize a CPR kit to resuscitate someone. This is similar in the sense that if someone came to the restaurant and they overdosed, they would certainly administer this medicine to help them save a life. It's something that obviously is happening way too much with addiction and overdoses in our society. It's not like it's happening in bars and restaurants all the time and it's a regular experience, but should there be an experience, there's an opportunity to save a life. And we know that this opioid epidemic, unfortunately, sees no color, shape, size, age. It has really grappled and gotten people of all walks of life. It could be your brother, your sister, your kid, your parent. And, we just want to be there to be able to try and save a life should the situation occur. So I don't think anyone has to worry this is going to somehow change their dining experience, their drinking, their dancing experience. It's just one more tool to help someone.
All right, thank you so much for clarifying that. Now, as somebody with an extensive background in this field, do you think workers in these positions are equipped to handle this type of situation? I know it could be a little overwhelming or maybe a little nerve-wracking, but do you think the workers are equipped to handle this?
People that work in the restaurant and nightlife industry, these are professional. These are, incredible people from all walks of life. And I have no doubt that they're absolutely ready and prepared should they be called on to do something like this. But we're also have to be clear that this is a voluntary program. There is no legal requirement that a worker administer the life-saving medication. There's no legal requirement that a business carries Narcan or one of these opioid antagonist medications, as they're sometimes referred to. So I have no doubt they are beyond capable. Many of them have actually said how important this issue is to them. So they are committed to it. So I think that the workers in particular are really the leaders here in many ways on a lot of these issues. And I have no doubt that they're more than capable, and it's totally understandable if someone was not or did not feel comfortable in the position to do something. And in that case, I have no doubt someone else would step up that may feel a little bit more comfortable. So, there's no judgments on personality traits or someone's interest or ability to do something. But overall, as an industry and a workforce, should this horrible situation arise, I think someone will step up to support.
All right, Andrew, thank you so much for bringing this information.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
Welcome back. With a mission to support organizations that provide nutritious food to children and families in need, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is offering nearly $2 billion in additional funding to food banks and school meal programs. Joining me to discuss what this means for thousands of families across the country is Vice President of the New York School Nutrition Association, Naim Walcott. Naim, thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. Now, can you tell me a little bit more about the Department of Agriculture's effort to support, families in need?
Yeah, sure. So the Department of Agriculture is essentially adding $2 billion in funds. The Department of Agriculture is depositing $2 billion in funds to help food insecurity issues in the country. Of that $2 billion, $1.5 billion is going to local food banks, and then the other $500 million is going to be going into helping school districts procure food to offset some of the supply chain issues and higher price wages for procuring food right now for schools.
Now, the last time that we spoke, we talked about, how federal school lunch funding was at risk. Do you think this is at all related to that, or, could that have possibly influenced this decision?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think so. I think every bit helps at this stage of the game. As you know, the universal meals at no charge has ended because of the emergency environment that we were existing in with the pandemic and COVID. So that urgency, sorry, it's my school bell. That urgency kind of dying down and subsiding a bit has not changed, though, on the front end for families. And so I'd like to think that part of the thinking to bring money into helping get food into neighborhoods and families and school districts is to help alleviate some of that residual effect that we're still seeing and that we're still experiencing.
Now, can you just explain, how this is going to help some of these families tremendously? Just why it's so crucial that, this funding is going to school meal programs?
Absolutely. So as you know, if you're going into any supermarket right now, you are seeing sticker shock, right? So some of the estimates range from 9% to almost 11% in inflation just on food costs alone. And that primarily is being hit by working families. That they're the ones that are feeling the pinch there in the greatest ways. But also for your local food service programs, as these are programs that we can't charge exorbitant amounts to feed our children. This money is going to help us make sure that our programs are staying fiscally sound in order to carry out the mission of feeding kids in the communities.
Now, this effort will also support food banks. While I was reporting during the pandemic, I noticed that food banks have become a much needed resource, and the demand was extremely high. Can you explain why we were seeing that? And do you think we're still seeing that 2 years after?
Yeah, I mean, right now, it's an interesting thing. So when you're looking at some of the stats, I was looking at USDA.gov. You're seeing that our unemployment is low. We're at our unemployment numbers are looking good, but the demand and the need in food banks is raising. It has risen. It's gone up significantly, and across the board, food banks are citing greater need from everything from manpower, but also greater need from their communities, the people that they are giving food out to. There's a huge need for that, and I think a large part of that is inflation. We just got through kind of the gas price thing, and great gas prices have come down to a certain degree, but food prices are still high. And it's important to note that when you're talking about this as it pertains to school nutrition, you're talking about feeding children, you're talking about feeding kids, and these are parents trying to feed their children.
Now, we talk about it a lot on the show, but for those who don't know, can you just explain what food insecurity is?
Sure. So food insecurity essentially is the inability of a family to procure or buy or purchase or provide healthy, nutritious food to their families. And we know food insecurity doesn't necessarily mean that a family might be permanently in a bad spot, but it could be the transition from one job to the next. It could also be, and what we're seeing, I think, more, which I think is more of the case right now, is that higher food prices across the area from the Bronx all the way to the East End of Long Island are impacting families in a very large way. I believe the stats on that are somewhere between 9 and 11% right now. And so, yeah, that creates food insecurity. And to the question we were talking about earlier, as far as how does that look when you're dealing with a food bank? Well, food banks traditionally are not usually dealing out in fresh produce, fresh vegetables, poultry. They're dealing with more canned goods, dry goods. Not to say that they don't have those things, but traditionally they're more shelf-stable items. So this area and this understanding that families are relying on food banks, it's great that we are getting more of this food to the food banks in order to help families out. But then at the same time, there is a bit of a gap that we're seeing as well, because there's other aspects of a child's diet and a family's diet that need to be provided for as well. And financial insecurity is a big limit to getting those things.
I'm really glad that you brought that up because I never thought of it before that, a lot of these food banks do give you food that you have to prepare, but not everyone may have access or, readily available a stove or fridge to store these items. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Can you just talk about how this overall effort will just be useful in combating this?
Yeah, so the food bank part, great. That's something that I think our communities, and especially communities that with higher percentage of people that are food insecure, can benefit from, is a wonderful, wonderful thing. At the same time, your local school nutrition program in your schools is probably your gold standard for feeding kids. So when we talk about that $500 million that's going to be going to help schools in this particular endeavor, that's more than invaluable, because your child now is going to be getting at least, at the very, very least, 2 complete meals with dairy, protein, vegetables, fruits, whole grains. These are things that are vital and necessary for a child to grow and learn and do well in school. So if we can help out with 2 of the 3 big meals of the day, that's a step in the right direction.
Now, I really want to know, this is a great initiative, and it's going to help so many families, but, what are some long-term solutions towards ending, food hunger or food insecurity? And please feel free to tell me if that's a loaded question because there's so many parts to it, but I'm just curious to know, what are some long-term solutions?
Long-term solutions. Well, I mean, there's a lot of different things that can go on into that question. So it's broad, but some ideas. We have to reinvest more in our local communities and local farms. That's a big thing. Getting more of a local agricultural lifestyle or community-centered food production. I don't know. We have to make food center plate in our communities. It's got to have more of a place than just the supermarket, because what we're seeing now is sticker shock, and there aren't relationships with the supermarket other than just paying. But if we can get more of local farmers, local produce, local meats, those are things that I think would help some of this. On a more stable end, and in the immediate, I think the other gold standard is universal meals for students at no charge. We were feeding more kids throughout the pandemic than ever before. So you have to ask yourself the question on how you think about the community. Are people taking advantage of it, or are people saying, what, this is a need that now the school is providing for my child, that I can now invest my resources in other areas for my community, for my family, etc. The immediate gold standard is allowing children not to have to deal with money at the cash register and come to school, get a good healthy breakfast, good healthy lunch. In some cases, there are supper programs and snack programs. That's your immediate gold standard. But across the board, we have to we have to get food to be more locally produced in ways in more communities that make it more accessible, and especially the healthier stuff. The canned foods and processed foods. You realize that there's a lot of there's lost knowledge when it comes to that. When we're talking about preparing meals,
Right.
There's a lot of people that don't know how to do that anymore.
Right. Now, can you just let everybody know how they can stay up to date with your organization?
Oh, absolutely. You can go to the New York State School Nutrition website. You can also find us and follow us on social media. You can get involved in the National School Nutrition Association as well. Currently, we have everything from podcasts. We have a newsletter called Fresh Bites that you can subscribe to hear about what's going on. In November of this month, October of this month, we'll be up in Verona, New York for our annual state conference. So there are tons of ways to connect, but your best, go to the hub, the New York State School Nutrition Association, and you'll find links to just about everything that we're doing, as well as the discussion points of things that are going on, action points, writing your local legislators about, making your voice heard and what your concerns are. So that would be my plug.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. As conversations around an unjust criminal justice system garners more attention, more people have called for the closure of the heavily criticized Rikers Island Correction Facility. This has been an ongoing fight for many in our city since 2015. Joining me to discuss her efforts to close Rikers Island is Vice President of Policy and Strategy at Exodus Transitional Community, Kandra Clark. Kandra, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, can you talk a little bit about how the fight to close Rikers Island began? I mentioned that it was in 2015, but was it a little bit earlier than that? Can you talk a little bit more?
Yeah, actually, the fight to close Rikers has been going on for decades. I always pay homage to the Jails Action Coalition because, they've been a lot of leaders, for decades working on this. When Just Leadership USA was formed, they took over the Close Rikers campaign really at a local level. And then when they moved towards more of a national level, it became Freedom Agenda, which is a member-led organization, mostly by directly impacted people who now work really locally to close Rikers Island. We have 120 organizations that have been signed on, And my organization specifically, we have 310 staff, 90% who are directly impacted. So it's really great to get all of our staff involved at so many different levels. And all of our staff and everyone really on the Closed Rikers campaign has been affected in so many different ways. So they can really talk to the nuances of solitary confinement, of extended lengths of stay, of going back and forth to court. So all the different issues that we really talk about, they get to talk about their personal experience with it.
Now, I know that Rikers Island remains very, very controversial. Can you explain why the facility is viewed in such a negative light?
Yeah, I mean, last year, 16 people died on Rikers. This year, the number's 15. Just most recently, when you hear in the news about how these folks are dying, there's a lot of suicides, a lot of overdoses. But a lot of times you're seeing that the guards are watching people bleed out for 10 minutes and not doing anything. The most recent death that we just had was actually on the barge, which we call the boat. And a young man climbed over the fence and jumped off the top of the boat into the Hudson River. So when you think about the length and the process that took and how officers kind of just stood by, people are not treated with humanity and respect. And actually, there needs to be a new, staffing structure in general. We need to have staff that can address the root causes of incarceration, and that's not officers. They're not mental health professionals or credible messengers or social workers. And we really need to think through a new staffing structure that would allow people to get the help that they need so they're not committing crime and going back in and out of the system.
Now, I know for me, I learned a lot about this through the Khalif Browder story, and his story gained national attention and educated so many people on the harsh realities of what happens at Rikers. For those who don't know, can you talk a little bit about that story and how it shined a light on the situation?
Yeah, so in 2010, Khalif was only 16 years old, and he got arrested for a robbery that he didn't commit, that they had no evidence on. And he was held on Rikers with a $500 bail that unfortunately his family could not pay, and for 3 years. And for 2 out of those 3 years, he was in solitary confinement. There's extensive evidence that showed that he was abused by correctional officers, that he tried to commit suicide several times. And still, with the court processes being delayed and just the injustice within our quote unquote justice system, when he was finally released and then in 2015, he, committed suicide and ended his life because he could not get over everything that happened to him in there. And, this is why we have been calling to end solitary confinement since then, even before then. Earlier this month, at the end of September, there was a hearing on ending solitary confinement. So, we're very hopeful that it will be ended soon.
Now, can you talk about the population of Rikers Island and how that contributes to all of the issues facing the facility?
Yeah. So, when we talk about serious mental illness, and if you look on the comptroller's website, there's, several graphs that kind of discuss the population. And one of them is around the serious mental illness of folks. So 18% of the population has serious mental illness. Now that's schizophrenia, bipolar, major depression. That's not including the folks that have general mental health concerns, right? PTSD or anxiety. So when you look at that population, it's over 50% of the population on Rikers has some form of mental health, with 18% having serious mental health. And if you look at the women specifically, it's over 86% of the population of women that are on Rikers have mental health. So again, we really need to focus on the root causes of incarceration and addressing, helping people get the help that they need so that way they can live better lives for themselves, their families, and our whole society.
Now, I understand people in the facility are awaiting trials, but that could take a very long time. How long are these people staying at Rikers?
Yeah, and you say awaiting trial, they're just awaiting a court date. These are folks that aren't even going to take it to trial. They're just trying to get to court.
Wow.
Right now, again, if you look at the comptroller's website, it's from 2021. The graph shows that the average length of stay is around 144 days. There's also recent data that gets pulled daily that the Vera Institute of Justice kind of coordinates with the Department of Corrections. So right now, the current length of stay for someone is 271 days. So again, people are not being produced to court. If they are being produced to court, they're not being seen. And that entire process is, it takes all day. I was incarcerated on Rikers for 4 months, so I've experienced this. You get woken up at 3 a.m. You finally get to the court appearance or the courthouse by, 9 or 10. And then sometimes by 5 o'clock, I'm leaving and I still haven't even got to see a judge. So that happens very regularly. And the court processes are just so slow that's why people end up languishing there for so long. And it's also why a lot of people end up pleading guilty and just taking a charge, even if they're not guilty, but it's just so they can get off the island, so they can get their apartment back, so they can get their kids back, so they can get their job back. I mean, we are really destroying families for very low level offenses.
Wow, thank you so much for clarifying that, because I had no idea that was kind of what went into it. Now, I know this effort has received support from former Mayor Bill de Blasio, who aimed to have Rikers Island closed by 2027. However, our current mayor has expressed concern that it may be idealistic and that we should have a plan B. What are your thoughts on that?
So, I always say at the height of COVID, probably around May 2020, we had the population down to 3,800. So we almost had the population down to what we need for these borough-based plans to work. And we did that through very intensive decarceration efforts. And the city did not, the public safety was not impacted in any way by doing that. So I always say that the plan that we have had in place, which has been led by directly impacted people, that plan will still be able to get that number down right now. I think that we could actually get that number down today through decarceration efforts, through community investments, through therapeutic units that are tied to hospitals. When we think about our most seriously mentally ill or physically disabled folks that are on the island and are elderly, I mean, that could happen immediately. And also ending city sentences. When we think about a city sentence, it's because someone committed a misdemeanor. Do they really need to spend 4, 6, or 8 months on Rikers? What if we put them in an alternative program and then they actually got the help that they needed, right? Let's think about it through a different lens. So I say absolutely, the mayor has so much information. We just drafted another report on how to reduce the women's population from 300 to 100. Tomorrow. So again, I think the city needs to really come together with people who are justice impacted and really follow through with the plan that we've had in place and learn from the history that we just had it down to 3,800 in 2020.
Now, Mayor Adams is also concerned that there just isn't enough space in borough-based jails to hold people who commit crimes. Would you say what you just mentioned, is that another alternative solution to dealing with somebody who may have committed a crime?
Absolutely. I mean, the therapeutic units that are tied to hospitals and nonprofits, there's one that's actually getting ready to be built now. And unfortunately, it's getting a lot of community pushback. And, again, we have to really stand bold and fight our communities back and say, hey, this is facts. When you have someone who is elderly, who has serious mental health, who maybe did commit a violent crime, but it's because he was in a psychotic break, they need help. By us putting them on Rikers, we're not helping our communities at all. In fact, we're making them more dangerous because they're more likely to experience more trauma on Rikers and then be more likely to come out and commit trauma to others. So hurt people, healed people, heal people. And that is a fact. So if we can start leading with love and really wrapping that support around folks, I think we would see it drastically change.
Now, I know a lot of people who may hear this, if they're not involved in this can be a little bit confusing, or they just may not understand. There's also a stigma attached to anyone who has been, in the prison system and stuff like that. How can people learn more before they actually make a judgment or make a decision on whether they want to support or not?
Yeah. So, I think people need to also realize 1 in 3 children across the United States has an incarcerated parent. At least 1, if not 2. When you look at New York State alone, 1 in 10 New York City residents has a criminal record. 1 in 7 New York State residents has a criminal record. So we keep putting the stigma to folks that have it, but it's a third of our population, basically, right? When you think about it that way. And I always kind of use myself as an example. I have an extensive criminal history, and yet I've been able to come home and through having a community and people, a network that believed in me, I was able to turn my life around, right, and address the root causes of why I became incarcerated to begin with. So at the very basic level, I'm always trying to talk to people and let them know that I'm justice impacted, whether that's in my apartment building, whether that's on the train, no matter where it's at. We need to have communications and conversation with our family members and get them to see that we are all human beings. And again, that hurt people and healed people heal people. So I think it's also taking it very back to the very basic. We need to have more conversations about it, be more open about it, and let people, identify us as humans. And that's why, another thing that Rikers needs to close, because they're so far away from everything, right? They're on this island that no one can get to. And I think that's why society in general just considers them not human, right? Because they don't have to see it. So the borough-based facilities will really allow the communities to play more of a key role in rehabilitation and ending recidivism.
Now, how can people learn more about this?
Yeah. So you can go to closerikers.org. There's a website there. You can learn as much as you want there. Just Leadership USA has the hashtag Just Us campaign. And I'm so excited because, with the Just Us campaign, they're really working at a national level to A, humanize folks that are incarcerated, but B, think about emergency preparedness and planning for evacuations.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we think about all the hurricanes that have happened, all the natural disasters. There's never an evacuation plan for people who are incarcerated. They have evacuation plans for animals, but they don't have it for human beings who are mothers, brothers, sisters, daughters inside. So definitely check out the hashtag Just Us campaign, hashtag Close Rikers campaign. And you can also go to Exodus's website, www.etcny.org, and get more information about it through there as well. So again, we work really using collective leadership.
We're at the end of our show. Thank you so much. We're at the end of the show, but please, everyone, check those links out. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
That's all for our show today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you in your safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.